done in terms of small and medium businesses. So employers that have 49 and fewer employees have a little bit of a different set of rules. First of all, maybe hearing some people mention that if you have fewer than 50, then you're exempt. That is not accurate. In the law, they could have easily said if you have 500 or fewer employees, you are exempt, but it does not say that. Instead, it says that the Secretary of Labor has the option to draft regulations that may exempt certain small businesses, So that has not been issued yet. So just if you or you know anybody that has less than 50 employees and they feel that they don't have to comply with this, that is not accurate as of last night. So hopefully that may be coming. That's not a certainty at this point. The other group of employees is 50 to 500. And the reason, the additional considerations that you all have is that employers of that size have existing FMLA employment obligations that you need to consider, and the impact of the coronavirus to those existing obligations. So specifically this new law, it goes into effect April 1st. That's something very important to keep in mind. And there are two primary components that you need to be worried about. First is the paid sick leave obligation. This is anybody that is on your payroll as of April 1st is eligible for this benefit. And I don't care if they're part-time, full-time, furloughed. If they are an employee, they are going to be eligible for this benefit. Now, the reasons why somebody can take this benefit is if they are unable to work, and including unable to work from home. So that is a big caveat for many employers that do have the ability to have their employees work from home. So that is something that carves out employees from that eligibility of this benefit. And it's very important that you start communicating right now exactly who those employees are so that they understand that they're at home, they're going to be paid for their work, but they need to be working, not just hanging out at home. And I also encourage people between now and April 1st, if you do have employees that can work from home, please go ahead and have them work from home just to have them set up electronically, because what you don't want to have is an employee that could work from home and you wait until April 1st and lo and behold, they don't have a laptop, they don't have this or that in order to enable them to do their job. Because at that point, then they would be eligible for this benefit and they don't have to work. So the calculation for this is 2 weeks of compensation based on their regular rate of pay. And the reasons for this can include testing positive for the coronavirus, if they're experiencing symptoms and seeking medical attention. Those types of reasons are going to be full compensation for that 2-week period. There are other options, including if an employee is staying at home, not able to telecommute, and is staying at home because their child's school is closed, which Shannon and I are definitely dealing with this right now. And I can tell you that I think the schools are going to be closed through the end of the year. That's not a legal opinion, but that's just my 2 cents. So you definitely need to take that one very, very seriously, because that's not an if, it is actually happening. And the compensation for instances if the employee is staying at home, not able to work, and they're at home because their child's school is closed, that is 2/3 of their weekly compensation for up to 2 weeks. The other piece that you need to be aware of, and this is regardless if you're in 500 or below category of employer, is that the other benefit is the expanded FMLA. Now, this is going to be particularly challenging for employers with 49 or fewer because you haven't had to worry about FMLA in the past. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but basically what FMLA does is it guarantees the employee's position for up to 12 weeks, which is as long as the issue that's triggering the FMLA benefit exists. So under this expanded FMLA, it only applies for employees not able to work, staying at home because their child's school is closed. So if you are in the 49 and below employee category, this is going to be something new for you, and it could be significant because similar to the compensation is 2/3 of their salary, but it's for up to an additional 10 weeks. So I'm going to walk through an example. So let's say on April 2nd, you have an employee that cannot work from home, but has to stay home because they have a child under the age of 18 and their school is canceled or closed. So immediately on day one, they're going to be eligible for job protection, which means you cannot terminate them or replace them while they're out on leave. Their compensation during this time period for the first 2 weeks, it's going to come through the paid sick leave benefit, and it will be 2/3 of their weekly pay. After they have exhausted those first 2 weeks under the paid sick leave, then their compensation for the remaining 10 weeks of their total 12-week period will come under the expanded FMLA. So something just to kind of have seared in your mind is if an employee is out because the school is closed of their child, it's always going to be 2/3. You can allow employees to use their company issued paid time off, and you can see why they may elect to do that because they'll get full pay versus 2/3, but you cannot require them to do so. This is all incumbent upon the employee to choose which benefits that they want to elect to use during
I have a follow-up question on that. So in theory, if this is only if they're not able to work from home, then they could actually, if their child's school is closed, could elect to be home, take 12 weeks of FMLA at 2/3 pay, plus still keep their full PTO to use at a later date.
Correct.
Basically. Okay.
Correct. And one important qualification, there is a bit of a eligibility threshold for the FMLA. It's not extensive, but it says that the employee must have been employed for at least 30 days with you. So that may carve out a tiny population, probably not a lot, but at least it's something, and the law does not require consecutive days. So just as long as they were on your payroll for 30 days. So I'm going to pause there. There's a lot of other nuances, but I don't want to go down a rabbit trail without getting to some of your questions. So Shannon, do you want me to read some of the chat items?
Sure. So we had Caesar asked a great question. So he was wondering if anybody, or if you've seen anybody experiencing employees not willing to come to work, basically saying that it's hazardous exposure or asking if they should be paid a premium. Is that something that you've seen or encountered so far, and how are you seeing people deal with that?
Yes, that's coming up quite a bit. First of all, this is where this is really helpful if they are able to telecommute. If they are able to telecommute, I would really encourage you to allow them to work from home, if nothing else, to get the fire drill out of the way as far as getting all of their equipment and everything set up to work probably for an extended period of time from home. But between now and especially with the mayor's executive orders that have been issued, I know we have several clients that are determined to be essential businesses, so they are still actually open. For those businesses, there's still a small population that probably can work from home. Again, I would strongly encourage you to get them set up at their home. And then for the remaining population, I think you've got to evaluate the safety and processes that you have in place. Now, there is a totally different risk profile for a hospital versus maybe a lumber yard or something in that type of industry. But if somebody is genuinely expressing a concern, I really encourage you to have one-on-one conversations. It's something analogous to what for employment issues is called the interactive process. So what you don't want to do is say, no, get your booty back out there where you're going to work, because that's only going to exacerbate, especially in this type of environment. Instead, have a dialogue with them. Understand and get from them exactly why that they do feel, that they are unsafe, because for some of our clients, they've actually been able to put measures in place because their concerns were reasonable. So don't overlook the opportunity to solve the problem or that you may have a solution for it. But in the meantime, as far as what your legal rights are, if you are an essential business and these people need to be out there, it's fine if you say that go home, but you're not going to be paid. So you do not need to pay them if they're not going to be working. Now there's caveats to that, because if they're salaried and they've worked any portion of a week under the FLSA, you need to pay them their week's compensation. So there's a timing issue that you need to take into consideration. But I encourage you to keep your employees close, particularly if you are an essential business and you need people to work. They want communication, and you don't have answers for them necessarily. But if you're an essential business, then you are obviously a critical link in a chain to hospitals, to other emergency supplies and that sort of thing that are absolutely critical to our economy and to our health and safety of our communities and certainly to this country. So I think some of it can also be addressed through explaining why it is so important that they continue to work. It's not just about having revenue continuing to pump into the company. It's also about the fact that if you're an essential business, then there's a direct correlation to the health and safety of our country. So I think that level of communication, so that people know that they have a purpose and what that purpose is. I know we've had clients have a lot more success whenever that is communicated versus just, I don't care about you. I don't care about your health and safety. Just get out there. That's what they're going to hear without some sort of big picture explanation as to why you're asking them to do what they.
Well, and I think too, there's a couple other questions that I think are valid. For example, like a cleaning company, people saying, oh, this is hazardous now going into homes and things. But a business can't pay a premium necessarily for that. And, I do think to some extent those employees should be grateful that they have a job, because the environment that we're in right now is very challenging for employees. But I would say, like, you're not obligated to pay like a premium for hazardous pay or anything like that right now. Like, it's definitely not required. And then also, people, if they haven't requested to go on FMLA and you can't afford to pay them, and I'm sure Kelly will get there, but it will actually be in an employee's best interest to go through a layoff versus being home with no work if they could work, or waiting for them to apply for FMLA, because at that point you cannot lay people off even if you needed to financially, and they're on the hook for 2/3 pay for 12 weeks. And so, I saw a comment here, I have an employee staying home now because they have anxiety. Am I obligated to pay that person? And I would say no, you're not. And so I think there needs to be communication there with that, team member. But if they're able to work, they need to be working, and you're not obligated to pay for that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And one other equation, and I'll send this to Shannon so that she can distribute it to you guys. But one important thing to keep in mind, and I'm sure you guys have heard about the SBA loans and all of that sort of thing, but even setting those options aside, liquidity is going to be a very, very critical factor for all businesses for at least the short term. And so I'm encouraging all employers to do, that are in that 500 and below category, to do a liquidity calculation. And this is a very back of the envelope type of exercise, but it'll give you a quick perspective on just how much cash you could be laying out over the next few weeks with regard to this new law. And then you need to balance that or take into consideration any decline in revenue that you may have, and then factor in how much cash you have on hand. But the calculation is taking a look at anybody that you will have on your payroll on April 1st, anybody that you intend or expect to have, and then take their full weekly compensation and multiply it by 2. And then add that to looking at your population of employees that have a child under the age of 18 and they cannot work from home. These employees cannot work from home. So identify that population of people, and then take their weekly salary, take 2/3 of their weekly salary and multiply that by 10. So take those two numbers, and that is kind of a worst case scenario in terms of what you might be looking at in terms of paid compensation above and beyond what you may have to pay out in terms of any type of accrued paid time off or something like that. And that's, of course, in addition to your labor will have to pay for those that are not on FMLA. So just keep that in mind because I think that's a very sobering calculation. And if that number scares you, then I really encourage you to, think about ways that you can cut down your employee count in order to mitigate your financial risk. Because the best thing that you can do for your employees and for this economy is to stay in business. As painful and as harsh as these decisions are, you staying in business is going to be the best thing for everybody, because picking up where you left off is much better than having to start over. And so a few weeks ago when this really first started, I mean, a lot of employers were trying to, do the right thing and kind of a bit of martyrship in terms of trying to pay out benefits to their employees. But you cannot do that in this circumstance, unfortunately. And it's only going to potentially jeopardize your business, which is just not what anybody wants.
So a couple questions. Okay, yeah, I'm not me. If I, for example, a full-time employee voluntarily says they don't want to work and they want to stay home. You would not be required to pay that person, correct? If they are able to work, not sick, they just don't want to work because they want to be home with their kids right now. You would not be on the hook because their kids are home. Could they potentially qualify even though they're...
Yeah, so okay. If I say, I'm good, I'm just going to kind of volunteer, they are on the payroll. So they are at a minimum. So for example, one of the qualifications for the paid sick leave is the quarantine, is being under a quarantine. And assuming they can't work from home, then yes, that person is absolutely entitled to benefits.
So let's say, I'm gonna say medical for now, because we have a lot of clients in the medical space. And so for example, they're considered essential, they're able to keep their doors open. But if they have an employee that's just like, not super comfortable with it, I'd rather just stay home. If their kid's school is closed as well, it basically gives them kind of an out there, right? To say, well, my kids are home, I can't come in, so now I qualify for 2/3 pay for 12 weeks.
12 weeks. And then, I mean, also you've got the whole, if I'm experiencing symptoms, and I'm not saying anybody's going to necessarily manipulate the system. I'm just saying it's a very low threshold, and your ability to validate these reasons is pretty limited as well, especially for the paid sick leave.
And it's 2/3 pay for the full 12 weeks, correct?
If the reason that they're receiving the benefit is school related, it's always 2/3.
So what if they're not able to do their job from home? So they're healthy, they're able to work, they have no issues, but they just don't want to work because they want to be home because their kids are home. But But could they say, well, my kids are home, so I can't really come in, even though maybe they could make it work with their home situation? There's no way to really know that. So if they're like, well, my kids are out of school, I'm not coming in theory, they could still qualify because their kids are home, correct?
The way
it's really hard to enforce.
Well, and the way every employer should look at it is not based on the person, but the position. So is this position able to work from home? And that's why I'm saying, identify this now. Like this,
so we'll say like a nurse. So like a nurse, for example, like not able to work from home.
Right.
And then if her kids are home from school, she could qualify for the 2/3 for 12 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. And her husband could be at home too and getting 2/3 from his employer.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a valid question. And then, so would you say it includes commissions? Like if commissions is part of somebody's base pay, my understanding is you have to do some kind of look back to calculate their compensation, correct?
Well, it's twofold. So if the individual is full-time and they get a wage, a salary, but then let's say on top of that, they're eligible for a commission or a bonus, it's just very clear it's based on your base rate of pay is the phrase that they use. But there's a look back period if in fact there is variable, or think about people in the restaurant industry. So if I'm a waiter and I'm making $2.50 an hour, you'll include the $2.50 plus their reported tips, looking back over, I think, a 6-month period.
Another question is, now that the stimulus is coming out, trying to incentivize employers not to lay people off, because I think they know that, the FMLA new rules are going to push employers left, and then now they're trying to get you to kind of come back right. So now with this new stimulus package, does that affect the amount of stimulus, the amount of headcount you keep? It would affect your stimulus, correct? And I know all that's really new. I don't even have my arms fully wrapped around it, but.
Well, and I mean, and I defer to you on anything tax related. So but my perspective, I mean, and I have through it, is that, I mean, as of so right now, all of you guys can go online and apply for the disaster relief SBA loan. And so I encourage you to consider at least even applying for it. And then you can always just turn it down or whatever, but you know, to have that option. I'm very worried about timing, because in this, you know, if you listen to the news or whatever, apparently it's going to take 24 hours to turn around these SBA loans. And historically it's closer to 8 to 12 weeks before it hits your bank account. And so I really caution you, because there's no language in the bill that it talks in terms of like expediting the underwriting process, which is great. But I mean, it is, it's going to.
I mean, my opinion just on the business side is, you know, you can only control like what you can control. And I think it's a very slippery slope. For example, if there's headcount, if things don't go correctly where you wouldn't be able to afford it, I would encourage people to make difficult decisions now. I would not assume that the government stimulus will help you. If it does, it's like, great, you know, but it could take the form of a tax credit that you would wait a year to see. It could take the form of refund checks. Potentially, I know they're deferring some Social Security potential payments, things like that. But the timing of all of that versus your real-time exposure over the next 12 weeks, not all businesses have the cash flow to sustain that in hopes of getting government help later. So I would just encourage people to, you know, pray about it, like for wisdom, because I know these decisions are hard, but like you need to take ownership of the business and what you can control. And I wouldn't assume that the government funds are going to help alleviate that significantly. It's just too disorganized. I don't see how it's even physically possible for them to fund things that quickly. I wouldn't, you know, bank on that. That's my personal opinion.
I completely.
Ask a question as well. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to get this. So, you know, with our company, we've got everyone working from home, which is perfectly fine. But I'm wondering, I haven't heard anything about pay restructure. With children being at home, I know our employees are very distracted. Some are working their butts off, and others, you know, they're working maybe 2 hours a day, and then they're just doing whatever they want to do at that point. So my question is could I restructure their pay legally and just tell everybody, look, everyone that's salary is going to go to hourly, and so if you're making $44,000 a year, that's about $22 an hour. So everybody is going to move to $22 an hour, and you send me your hours, and you will be paid for the time you're working.
This is a real estate team, just for reference.
Yes. So yes, and that's a great solution. And I've got template letters that I'll make sure Shannon gets to you guys that are coronavirus specific. And under the law, you are able to reduce an employee's salary, but you have to give them notice before it takes effect. So there's not a specific time period, but you just can't, you know, hey, by the way, everything that you did this week is going to be at, you know, a much lower rate. You touched on one thing that's going to be really important is that if you're salaried and you're exempt, there's the FLSA threshold that you need to be cognizant of. And the only thing you need to worry about, and I encourage people, don't let that be an impediment to you reducing their salary, is that you just need to have a timekeeping mechanism. Doesn't have to be sophisticated, particularly if it's only going to be short term, but just know that if they go below that threshold, then they, at whatever hourly rate that they're at, they are subject to overtime. And so to protect yourself, you can communicate under no circumstances are you supposed to do overtime. Before you do any overtime, you must get my permission. But the law says that notwithstanding that communication, if they do work overtime, they're still entitled to time and a half, even if you have a policy against it. So if they do work the overtime hours, they're going to be eligible for it. So protect yourself by having some sort of timekeeping mechanism, even if you have them send their supervisor or you an email when they start work and when they stop, but just something to document.
There's a timekeeping. So I would recommend using something like T-Sheets. It's you know, it was purchased by Intuit like last year, but it's a very simple timekeeping mechanism. It has an app on people's phone. And then I would have a formal, just a policy that's like, hey, this is a new policy. You need to track your time in T-Sheets. You're not allowed to work more than 40 hours without, you know, approval, that kind of thing, and then have everyone do it. But it has an app on their cell phone where they can literally clock in, clock out. It's very, very easy to use, and it's inexpensive. You're talking probably 20 or 30 bucks a month to get it in place. So that would be just a really easy solution that you could probably move on quickly.
And one other thing I want to mention, if you have a team that can work from home, I mean, there is nothing wrong with you saying, you know, I need high productivity. Where are you?
Absolutely.
I mean, stay on them. I mean, that's perfectly acceptable, and you should. I mean, it's a different dynamic. And so if you're not able to see them, then there's a certain amount of, you know, you have to kind of pivot and have a different type of engagement with them. But the more that you can spend time with them, the better off you're going to be.
There was a question about, you know, is there a stipulation? Basically, if an employee has children that are school age, but they have a stay-at-home parent, and my understanding is no. Like if they can't do their job from home, they can choose to stay home. I don't think that you can say, well, your situation is that you have another parent home. You're not really allowed to do that. So you have to look at every you know, individual employee on a case-by-case basis. Can this person do their job from home? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then there's, you know, a high likelihood that they will qualify under some kind of like, I have symptoms, I don't feel good, or my kids are home from school. So I would assume that anyone that cannot work from home is going to be probably in that bucket.
Yes, I completely agree. And one thing that is important is you know, if they test positive for the coronavirus, or if they are experiencing symptoms, then notwithstanding the fact that they're working from home, they're going to qualify for the benefit because they cannot work.
So one question I thought was interesting. So if you have an employee that has a family member that's at high risk exposure, so employee that has a family member, let's say in the medical field, that's in a hospital. So should you ask that employee to stay home? And what if they're essential? Or if your business is essential, should you still try to have that employee stay home? And if so, what are your obligations to that employee? My initial thinking is if they're willing and able to work, I don't think you can force them to stay home. And if you do, I think you're going to be on the hook probably for paying them.
Also, so if they're working, you've got to pay them. I mean, that's like, that's one of the commandments of employment law. But I would ask, like, so clearly they've communicated something to you to share that information. I would definitely have a one-on-one conversation with them. Just because somebody is working in the medical field or they have a spouse in the medical field, that in of itself, in my opinion, doesn't, you know, create a situation where that person needs to stay home. But see if they're trying to passively convey something to you, because if they are really alarmed about it, then you do need to, you know, kind of, everybody has different risk tolerances and that sort of thing. So that's what you've got to kind of balance and make sure that it's a measured response versus just taking everybody at face value. So I would have a conversation, see what's, you know, what the impetus for their concerns are, and see if there's anything real that's underneath, you know, underlying that concern.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think if they're able to do their job from home, they need to do it from home.
Yes.
And then if they're not, like if they're out in the field or something like that, you know, encourage them to practice distancing. Don't be close to people. You know, my opinion, that person would probably still be willing and able to work. So I don't know that I would keep them home if they're essential.
Right. But what you don't want to do, and you can't tell them not to say this, but what you don't want to do is have one of your employees out in the field communicating to your employees that they think that they're exposed. Like that's,
I think I'm sick, they're making me come anyways kind of thing.
Yes. I mean, because that's only going to drive your clients bonkers. So.
I get some feedback here that, you know, somebody's already applied for the relief on the 20th and they still haven't heard anything back. And so I would say that's probably in line with what I would expect. I do have somebody else here. I know it's not exactly related to labor, but, having businesses trying to get out of long-term contracts and things right now. And I'm sure that's something a lot of people are seeing, where businesses are trying to reduce, agreements and things that they have in place already with your business. And that's something that I'd be happy to visit with people offline too, because I know it's not specifically labor related, but you're going to have to just use a lot of judgment in what clients it's worth trying to give some kind of relief. What I've seen is that, it's like, can we defer some payments to try to keep you happy? Can we do some kind of discount? Just any way that you can work with people within reason to try to keep their loyalty as a customer, I think is going to be the right move versus strictly sticking to that contract. However, I do think that there's some things that, businesses need to continue paying for 2 months, like certain services and things that they shouldn't be able to just cancel out of every contract that they have. So I think you're going to have some wisdom there. And then I see who messaged me that, and so we can talk about that, afterwards as well.
If there's a contract that you're concerned about where you have the pay obligation, take a look for a section called force majeure, because that's going to be I guarantee you, all of us are attorneys are looking at those all the time. I've got a pile of them on my desk. And what force majeure is an act of God, which, whether you see this as not an act of God or not, it probably is. So an act of God is like a once in a lifetime, unforeseen, unprojected type of situation, which I cannot think of something that falls more in line with that than what we're dealing with right now. But typically what force majeure does is it abates, it suspends. So it doesn't erase your obligation, either party's obligation, but it just suspends. You'll see it a lot in leases. So anybody that has a lease, go look at your contract, particularly if you're worried about having to pay, and contact your landlord, invoke your force majeure rights. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just say, look, there's been this extraordinary circumstance. I want to exercise my force majeure rights, and then talk to them, because even if you can pay some amount, I think that's going to go a long way in terms of goodwill versus just, not paying anything and just waiting for them to call. I think the more proactive you can be with your contracts, the more successful and more kind that they're going to be on compromising versus just waiting for them to, raise the issue with you.
So I see some questions too, to confirm it does not apply to 1099 contractors. I would say yes, it does not apply to 1099 contractors. And then does the San Antonio order qualify employees for the kind of the first part of the FMLA? If it's an essential business and they're allowed to keep working, like they can keep working. I don't think the San Antonio order changes that if it's an essential business.
Right. If it's an
non-essential business, maybe. Like if you're a retailer, like let's say you're a retailer right now that had to close.
Right.
Then they would qualify, right?
I'm sorry?
They would qualify if you're non-essential business and the business closed and you have hourly employees, they would qualify.
Yes.
So it really depends if you're an essential business and they're still able to work.
Yes.
So if you're not and your business is closed right now, then before that April 1st deadline, you need to be doing some serious headcount review.
Yes.
Because they're all going to qualify.
Yes.
Or try to get your business exempt. Like a lot of people in the construction space right now, medical space right now, like you can apply with the city or discuss with the city if you need to be in that exempt category. And so I would encourage you, if there's any reason why your business maybe could, it might be worth trying to be exempt, because then it doesn't put you in that like forced closing category. So it's just something to think about. What do you think about that, Kelly?
Yeah. I think anything that you can do, as long as you're not putting yourself at risk, your employees at risk, then certainly, absolutely go for it.
And then hours affecting medical coverage. So if somebody is going from full-time to a reduced schedule, how does that affect medical? I think it changes on a case-by-case depending on what your medical provider says. So I think that's something to look at. But what are you seeing, Kelly, as far as people reducing hours, moving people to part-time, and then their medical coverage?
Yes. So there's two important questions that you need to ask your insurance broker or your insurance provider. The first one is just what you said. Does moving from full-time to part-time, knowing that it's this extraordinary circumstance, hopefully it's going to be short-term, in confirming whether or not that affects their eligibility under the healthcare plan. And then second of all, something you need to get a yes/no answer to is, to the extent that you either provide for short-term disability or there's a short-term disability option that your employees can pay for, you want to get a yes/no answer right now, whether testing positive for the coronavirus makes them eligible for benefits under short-term disability. Because that's a question, you know, God forbid, if you do have somebody that does test positive, they've paid for short-term disability, what are they're going to want to know, they're going to be scared, and they are going to want to know whether or not short-term disability covers, and that should not be a maybe answer from your insurance provider. So send it in writing, get it in writing, so that you have it now in case you need to share that information later on.
I've had people ask, for example, let's say you reduce somebody's schedule, so they were full-time, either salary or hourly, and you move them to some kind of reduced pay, reduced schedule arrangement. Are they able to still qualify or apply for unemployment to make up the difference if you reduce their pay by more than a certain percentage?
Yes, if you reduce, and there's a wonky calculation through the Workforce Commission, but generally it's about 40% if you reduce their compensation. But I will say, I mean, reduced compensation unemployment benefits has historically been very, very slow, just because it's one of those, well, they're not unemployed, so it's kind of a, you know, somebody that's not as urgent as somebody that is completely out of a job. And there's more validation that has to take place by the TWC. What were your wages? What was the reason for the reduction? Was it performance related? I'm saying that to say the line is really, really long at the unemployment line, at the unemployment office. So put somebody that is getting or is applying for reduced benefits, I just think they're probably going to go to the end of the line, or it's going to be a very long time before they receive their benefits, versus somebody that's been terminated and they have a letter from their employer explaining the reason for the termination. Those types of claims are going to get processed so much faster because it's just cleaner. It's easier.
What about a furlough? Like, so if you furlough, do they qualify for unemployment if they're furloughed?
They
or is
do.
it kind of same? It's like kind of, but it'll take
yes. I mean, they do qualify for unemployment benefits, but they also qualify for the paid sick leave and the expanded FMLA. So that's what you got to take into consideration is, yes, you can take them to zero. And to me, the only real benefit of a furlough is that to the extent your healthcare plan will still provide health benefits to employees that are not actively working due to a business downturn, if they will still provide insurance coverage, that is something that's nice, is that they still have health care, even though they don't have any work, they're in line at the unemployment office. Still, that's kind of a time factor, but they will also be eligible for the paid sick leave and the expanded FMLA.
I have a little person behind me. So a couple of questions too. I see somebody says, so are salary employees, is it salary and hourly? It's both. It's anybody that's on your payroll, that's a W-2. And then does the April 1 date apply to actual days worked or paid date? That's a great question. So can you talk about the effective date and kind of how that's going to work?
I mean, so the effective date is the date that they can start applying for these benefits. So let's take an employee that cannot work from home and you're not an essential business. Then come April 1st, they're going to be eligible for up to 2 weeks of pay. And I know that's kind of a logistics nightmare because I think it's like a Wednesday or something, maybe a Tuesday, I can't remember, but it's not, you know, an elegantly placed date. So it's gonna have a little bit of complication as far as the accounting for this. And if you all haven't already done so, I highly recommend that you all create a different line item or accounting code for all expenses that you're incurring as a result of these paid sick leave and expanded FMLA benefits. Just because if you do apply for the tax credits, which you should, and Shannon is going to be wonderful at helping you take care of that. But the more that you can unequivocally point to the amount versus you having to parse through and, you know, all of that mess, it's going to just expedite the process significantly.
There's a question about, you know, do part-timers qualify for the 12-week 2/3? And my understanding is anybody on your payroll qualifies, but it would be based like on their pay. So if they're part-time, you know,
Right.
that would be what they would be eligible for, is 2/3 of their part-time pay, but they're still going to be eligible. So another
Correct.
thing is to think about is if you take some full-time people and you reduce their schedule or their hours to try to, you know, reduce some of your costs, you need to keep in mind that also when they calculate, if they go on FMLA after that, it would be based on their historical pay. So if you lower to part-time now, then when they move, if they move to 2/3 or claim FMLA, it'd be 2/3 of like their last X number of months of pay. It's going to have a calculation to it. So moving someone to a part-time will not, you know, affect your overall cost burden significantly, potentially, to think about. So let me see what other questions we have here. So updates on payroll taxes, and the government's allowing companies to defer those. They passed through the Senate, and it's still waiting in the House and to actually be signed, but the expectation is that there will be some kind of deferral on payroll taxes, but I don't know that it's been finalized yet. My assumption is probably by early next week we'll have a better idea like what that's going to look like. So once I have some good information on that, I can send that out as well. But I don't know exactly how that's going to fall out right now. And Kelly, I don't know if you have additional feedback.
This bill, which while it was being tossed around in the Senate, they didn't publish the actual text of it, so it was very frustrating. So just this morning, whenever it did get passed over to the House, they did publish it, and it's like 880 pages. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
We were talking to a bank today about the new stuff coming out with the SBA, and previously the banks didn't really have the authority to change any part of their like loan process or underwriting because the government hadn't officially come out to give any kind of guidance. So I do think that that's going to be finalized probably by early next week, to where you're not going to have to go through almost like FEMA with the hurricane. We have to go through kind of this local office in Houston for the loan. I think that our banks will be able to start loaning and helping. That's what I think is going to happen next week, where they're going to have more guidelines from the government with, you know, do they have more flexibility in their underwriting? What additional things that they can be doing. And so we're working with a couple of our bank partners just on having kind of a plan for that next week, like once we have that nailed down, to send contact information. So if anyone on this call is like, hey, I might need a loan, I might need a line of credit, you know, I need to talk about this, like reach out to me. And I do think in general right now, if you have access to credit or you can get a line of credit in place, I think it would be a wise move. Not saying that you need to use it, but if you have access to credit and you can get a line of credit, I just think it would be a good idea. So if anybody needs some banking recommendations or help with that, just let me know. It's just nice to have if you need it.
I have a question about that as well. So do y'all know what the rates are on these loans? Is it 3%? I've heard that number.
I saw 3.75 and then 2.75 for nonprofits, but I don't know.
Okay.
It's going to be something in that range. And then if you can get a traditional loan through a bank right now, I think they're probably more like in the 5 to 7.
Yeah.
But like, for example, if you're going to do a line of credit between 6 and 8%, but you can get it quickly, you can get it now, and you probably aren't going to need to use it. It's going to be a lot faster to not go the SBA route and just go get something in place with your banker that you have a relationship with. If you go the SBA route, it's probably going to take several weeks. So it's kind of weighing that, like, do I think I really need it? Is it worth paying some extra percents to get in line faster? Because non-SBA loans are a lot faster. If you have strong credit and strong financials, they're much faster to get in place. SBA has, 10 other hoops you have to jump through. So you just have to weigh the kind of benefit there for the lower rate versus the extra hoops, and then also how badly you think you need it. So, and you can also try for both. You could have a conventional loan going and then also go the SBA route and see if, so Go ahead, Tomas.
Are the SBA loans, is this something that's always available year round at a 3.75, or is it just during this time?
Just my understanding is just because it's called the disaster relief. It's specific to this issue.
There's different SBA programs. So they have SBA programs for certain things for business owners all the time. Like if you're buying a building, they have certain SBA loans for business startups, but it falls under like different sections. So there's kind of different types of loans that they have for different reasons. So there is always some kind of SBA program with your bank. It's usually for startup costs or potentially buying a building. You can go an SBA route. But again, anything that has the government rules and regulations in place, it has additional hoops, like how much you have to, it has more requirements around pay down, your financials, your reporting. So it's kind of like having it's a lot more challenging to get through than conventional. So I always, my preference is always the people, if you have access to credit and you can go conventional, I would. I do know that they're saying there's a part of this that you wouldn't have to pay back. So maybe it makes sense to do that, but I also think that you're going to have to demonstrate that you've suffered like a severe economic loss. And you also usually have to demonstrate that you're not able to obtain credit anywhere else. So like, if you have solid financials, a bunch of cash in the bank, and that's your situation, the government's probably going to tell you no. So it's very challenging to get an SBA loan. Not saying that it's impossible, because people get them, but it's pretty challenging.
Okay, I have a question. Being an essential business, I mean, we are classified as essential being insurance or financial services. All my staff right now are working from their home, but I'm a little concerned about future income, how things are going to be with people wanting to buy insurance or actually dropping their insurance right now because they're not able to pay because they don't have employment. Is it, if you're going to make a move, it sounds like to me, if you're going to reduce staff, which that's the last thing I want to do right now, but if I'm going to reduce staff, I need to do that before April 1, and I need to give some kind of notice as soon as possible here. I'm assuming that's what you're kind of saying, unless we have just bukus of money in the bank to be able to get through this.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately. I mean, I think that's the conservative viewpoint that I completely agree with. I mean, instead of just hoping that you're going to get some kind of SBA loan that gets forgiven. But one point that you brought up, which is really important, I have a template notice for termination, and it's really important that if you do terminate anybody, that you do it in writing, and it protects you in the unlikely event somebody tries to say that, I didn't realize I was terminated, something like that. You're going to have a letter dated that says otherwise. But it's also very, very helpful for the employee, because if they can take that and when they're filing for unemployment insurance, it expedites their claim process, because it's a letter from you, the employer, explaining that it was not performance related. And so that's going to expedite their process as well. So it definitely needs to be in writing. I've got a template for you, and I'll make sure that Shannon shares that with everybody.
Okay, thank you.
And just one other point I want to make sure is clear. It's not that you can't terminate employees after April 1st. You certainly can, but while they're on paid leave, that 2-week period, or if they're on FMLA, you cannot, you can fire them, but I highly do not advise it. So that's why it's not that you can't fire people after April 1st, it just becomes a lot more precarious. And what I worry about is that, inevitably businesses have A players and they have B and C players. And if your B and C players end up being the ones that take these benefits and they're out on FMLA and you have to cut staff, what I want to avoid is you all having to cut A players, for cash flow purposes, and you're stuck with the B and Cs.
Excellent, thank you.
So a question was, have you heard from help for paying payroll and not having to pay it back? I have heard that there will be a loan potentially, or tax credit for people who pay payroll, but my understanding is it's not going to be specifically, if you get the SBA loan, you will have to prove that you used it to pay payroll, which I think is going to be interesting how they prove that. But if you get the loan, you can use it for payroll. But again, I just have concern how quickly you can get the loan and actually get it in place to make payroll. Again, they say that they can turn them around in a few days, but historically with any kind of government subsidy, that's not really how it goes. Like we all saw the disaster relief from, you know, the hurricanes, for example. Like I guarantee you those businesses were not getting loans in 24 hours. It's just not the reality of how it works. So yes, you can apply for them. Yes, you can get them. You have to prove that you're using it to cover payroll, and they have some benefits for keeping people on payroll. I just think it's going to take a long time to actually realize that. So it's just something to keep in mind. Another question was, do you know exactly how the payroll is calculated? So if you reduce somebody to part-time, Kelly, let's say now, how are they calculating the benefits, the 2/3 pay? How far back is the look back?
Well, and this is where there's a lot of ambiguity in the bill.
And I know we talked about commissions, but
yes.
also overtime. Like if it's somebody who part of their pay is that they regularly work overtime, you know, those kind of things.
Right. So the way that the law reads is, you know, if you're full-time and you have a base rate of pay, then it's very unequivocal that it's just based on that base rate of pay, not any additional type of stuff. But if an individual, the way it's broken out is that reality where there's a base rate of pay versus having a variable schedule. So if there's a variable schedule, then that's where you're going to do that 6-month look back. So where it's ambiguous is if you take somebody from full-time that had a base rate of pay, and then you take them to part-time where they're still not in that variable bucket. You know, it's ambiguous as to how you exactly that you calculate those benefits. So hopefully there's going to be some additional guidance over the next, you know, week from the Secretary of Labor to kind of close these gaps. And I'll certainly keep you posted, but I think you should plan for worst case scenario, which is the fact that you're going to have to, you know, do a look back in terms of the compensation. And as Shannon mentioned earlier, don't expect that, you know, reducing somebody from full-time to part-time is going to save you for the purposes of the benefits.
And then one question was to be clear that employees affected by children at home are still qualified for these benefits, even if the business is an essential business. And I would say yes. So if the kids are home and they're not able to do their job from home, they would qualify. Now, if someone can do their job from home and their kids are home, my understanding is they need to figure it out.
Exactly.
So it really would be, you know, are they able to do their job from home? Yes or no?
And that's why it's really important that that's communicated right now so that there is no ambiguity about whether or not, and that should be based on the position, not the individual.
Yes. And I would take, I would literally go through your employee list and I would put them in 2 columns. 1, can do job from home. 2, can't do job from home. And then, but also even the ones that can do job from home, keep in mind, if they get sick, they would be qualified for the 2-week. Correct? Jump in, Kelly, if I'm wrong.
I'm sorry.
But they would not qualify. I said, but if they are in the can work from home column, but they get sick, there would be a 2-week pay, but they would not necessarily qualify for the 2/3 because they can work from home once they get better. But the can't work from home column, the cannot work from home column, you would need to look at if you had to pay for 2 weeks that they were sick plus the additional 2/3 for 12 weeks.
Correct. And this is part of the irony of this law is if you test positive for coronavirus, you get 2 weeks. I mean, and then of course you get to exhaust if there's any company issued paid time off. But one additional thing to think about under that scenario is if you have 50 to 500 employees, you do need to also keep in mind existing FMLA obligations. So getting the coronavirus is going to be considered a qualifying event. And so they're on day 1 that they're out, if they do test positive, then their job is going to be protected under FMLA for up to 12 weeks. Now they're only going to get compensation under this new law for 2 weeks under the paid sick leave provision. The remaining 10 weeks of that 12-week period, that's where hopefully short-term disability may kick in. They can use any existing PTO that they may have accrued through the business, but that's it. That's the only compensation you have to give. But that's another, you know, individual that I really don't recommend that you terminate while they're out on FMLA.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any questions? And if you want to unmute to ask your question, feel free, or if you're more comfortable typing it to me, that's fine too. But does anyone have any additional just questions? I know there's probably a lot, or even specific scenarios to your business. If you're not comfortable sharing or asking, you can either message me privately through this now, or you can email it to me and we'll try to come up with an answer later.
Well, I've got one more question. If we do lay people off, do you advise that we give them some kind of a severance? Would that be advisable?
Again, it kind of comes down to the cash flow situation. Severance, if you're going to somebody severance, get a release of claims in exchange. Get something for that. I just worry about whether or not you're going to be able to continue to do that in the future, and not necessarily that you have to always give people severance, but you need to make that decision based on, okay, worst case scenario, and I have to cut back to the core. Am I going to be able to offer severance to this, all of those individuals that may be affected up to the worst case scenario? So you can, but I recommend that you get a release of claims, which I have a form for that as well. Just because if you're going to pay it, you might as well get something in exchange. But I caution you, it's a cash flow question that I'm worried about.
If you're saying get a release of claims for unemployment, is that what you're saying?
Severance. So severance is like, I'm terminating you and I'm giving you an extra sum of money that it's not because you worked hours or anything like that. It's an above and beyond payment to the employee.
Okay. All right.
Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
The one other piece of advice is to look at your policies on paid time off, because I'm telling you, every single one of your employees is going to start scouring those. Yeah. So take a close look at that and be ready to answer questions on interpretation. And it's much better to, have communication surrounding your expectations and your interpretation of that versus, letting that issue kind of percolate, because that will fester quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? And I do want to be clear too, like, I know everyone's heart in this, like, we all love our people, like, nobody wants to have to reduce headcount. Like, that's not the goal, the spirit of this, but we want everybody to be armed with just the information, so the potential of how it can go, so you can plan accordingly.
Little person again.
A coworker.
She's like, your time is up. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email them to me, and then I will make sure that I get on them with Kelly, and we can send some kind of even just summary of just questions people asked and kind of a high level, and then we can kind of go from there. But if you have any other concerns too, like most of you have, my phone number, I'm happy to jump on a call or talk through things, and then maybe even try to schedule a follow-up potentially next week as more information comes out. If Kelly will have me, maybe we can try to schedule another one. But I know there's just a lot of questions going through everybody's mind, and unfortunately with the April 1st deadline, I feel like everyone's in a bit of a scramble to get their arms around it. So any questions you have, send them to me. I will get to them as fast as I can, and we'll follow up with everyone after this. So thank you so much, Kelly, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you everyone for dialing in. We do have a recording of this. I will put it into a Dropbox, and I will send a link to everybody that was on email distribution. So then if you want to forward that to anyone, feel free. And then we'll follow up. So, and then some of the templates that Kelly has, she can send that, and I can send that out as well.
Thank you all very much.